we are now. I've got the, yes.
Thank you.
So yeah, I mean, thanks very much for having me. Like Andy said, I'm still in my work gear, just come back from work on the train from London. So, but it's great to be here. I definitely wanted to make sure I could come. This is our very compact team in Bicester BUG. So that's me, top left. I have a slight long distance cycling addiction, which I'm still serving. So that is me on the way to a cycling event around Ireland. The top right is Rick, who is our only retiree on our committee. The rest of us are all full-time working people, although he seems to be busier than the rest of us most of the time. Bottom right is Catherine Hickman of the Windrush Bike Project Hickman dynasty. So I take it with great pride that both Catherine and now Kevin and Bridget also live in Bicester. I'm taking that as a vote of confidence in Bicester's transition to better cycling. Bottom middle is Paul Troop, who is a barrister and invaluable diesel engine of keeping us all going and keeping us all on a good navigating our way through the vagaries of council policies and process. And bottom left is my very tolerant wife, who looks after events and stuff for Bicester BUG along with Catherine, and also suffers all my cycling trips and time spent doing Bicester BUG stuff. So really, what I also want to say is, that's the committee. That is a small team. We're not a big organization, right? There's only 3 of those people who are actually like full-time committee people who we actually kind of on the treasury, our treasurer, secretary, and myself as chair. And we only have 22 people who are brave enough to pay a small subscription fee and be members. It's really our kind of wider outreach, which is has a bit more impact. So we do run a mailing list. We have quite a lot of Twitter followers. We keep a close eye on the Bicester Advertiser and Oxford Mail, a bit like Cyclox does. We don't have a regular column, but we do get asked for comment quite a lot and consider quite carefully how we position ourselves in those discussions and debates, because I think that's quite low effort impact, given that we have such a relatively small number of people. We did, during COVID, you might think book packages is a bit of an odd thing to have on there. During COVID, we set up to do book deliveries for the local independent bookshop who had shut their doors, of course, during COVID. And it has continued. And that's something actually that bizarrely is still going. I thought it'd be very temporary. But quite a lot of people from within our wider membership network find that quite a fun thing to do. A bit like Andy was saying, volunteering for the stall. It's nice to get out. Each book gets delivered with a little sticker on it saying hand delivered by bike, and you get a little chat to people on the doorstep and say how nice it was, and they say, oh, isn't it nice? It's just like the old days. Isn't it nice not to have a big van drive up on your front lawn and throw a book at your door? So it's quite a nice little thing to do that also doesn't require a huge amount of effort on our half. And a lot of time behind the scenes going through planning applications, negotiating with officers, emailing, so on and so forth. And this has all been built up over the last 4 years, because of the people I showed you on the first slide, apart from Catherine, who I think has been a bit longer, we're all new to Bicester, because as I think I'll explain now, also we're predominantly followed by women. I forgot to say that on Facebook, which I don't know if Cyclox is as well. I'd be interested to hear from other people how your gender divide works. But for us, it's definitely women, and that does shape how we position ourselves and how we behave online and on social media. I think it's kind of important to realise where the momentum is in the town. So yes, as I said, we're all relative newcomers to Bicester, unsurprisingly, because Bicester's expanding like crazy. Make of that what you will, good, bad, or ugly. It's good for me. I'm happy I live here now. So the actual origins of Bicester, I mean, what exists of Bicester currently is that this little bit here, which is where I live. Around here, this is Cabersfield. Around here and down there and through that. That is all being built. That is all being built. That is still fields, but will also be built. All this will be built on. There's currently a planning application for that. This, a drive-through Greg's here, so on and so forth. So you get the message. There's a lot of our planning applications coming in, and that's also the stuff inside the town. Plus, we have Bicester Village, who also put in planning applications now and then, because they have recently bought the sports fields which are next to them. But I can probably go into that in a separate discussion. That's not too big a topic for just now. So the point is, there's a lot of planning applications, so that also influences what we can do, how we have to position ourselves, and what the opportunities are. So, and the other thing is Bicester, in terms of stats, I've stolen these stats from Patrick's LC Whip, which ironically, I suppose, one of the meetings that Patrick organised in Bicester to engage with the people of Bicester when he was putting together the LC Whip was how Paul and myself met, and essentially then came up with the idea of forming Bicester BUG about 4 years ago, because Patrick went around the room and everyone had to introduce themselves, and it turns out both Paul and I both lived in the Netherlands and both had the same opinion that Bicester is a smallish town, flat as a pancake, and could be a great cycling town like we had lived in the Netherlands if it were only given the chance. So from then on, we decided to put some effort into making that a reality. But we are up against it because pretty much everyone in Bicester has a car. It's it's very sort of suburban. The old town of Bicester is very small. It's essentially 2 or 3 streets in the centre. Everything else is post 1960s onwards. Most of it's 1980s kind of suburban developments, which are all have car parking and garages. But we do have a fair amount of, because it is quite compact, quite flat, I think there's quite a lot of cycling that happens already. There's a reasonable amount of cycling infrastructure that was put in when those housing developments were put in. And it's not a big town, it's only 3.5 kilometres wide. We do have 2 train stations, we're pretty well connected. One of the reasons why I live here is because it is so well connected, and a number of other people whose commutes are shorter from Bicester than they would be from inside London. And ironically, given all the brouhaha about LTNs in Oxford, a lot of the developments in Bicester were already built as LTNs. Just to go very briefly back to this area and this area and this area are essentially LTNs. You cannot drive across these places very easily. It is remarkably difficult. You essentially have to go either into the centre and back out, or out to the ring road and back in, which I think is quite ironic, given that they actually, they exist all over Bicester already. We did sit down at one point and figure out what it would take to fully LTN Bicester, and I think it was only about 3 more roads we'd have to close to make the whole thing LTN'd. Nowhere near the amount that has to go on in Oxford, for example, because most of the work has been done for us from construction. So our strategy, given that background, we are a small team, we have a lot of planning applications, and there's a lot of car ownership already, but there is a kind of nascent cycling and walking kind of environment. is a lot of constructive engagement with officers. So we never kind of want to sort of block things, because most of the stuff has already been signed off in terms of local plans, etc. All of that development I showed at the beginning, I mean, that's already on the local plan. There's no way that there's not going to be houses on those fields. The question is making the best of it. Paul Troop, for example, he's very much of the opinion that if we can use the policies that are at our disposal in an effective way, we can make the arguments in a way that they will happen more likely. And if we stay on topic, on policy, on practicality than anything else. And we quite often draw up what we think are cheap, viable options in a visual way to put them to officers, applicants. Quite often talk to the applicants directly if we can. For example, Bicester Village, not Bicester, Bicester Motion, who own Bicester Heritage, which is the old airfield here. Talking to them directly quite often helps and put together what are usually pretty modest adaptations to their plans to make them far better. And I haven't mentioned it on this slide, but we reference the hell out of LTN 120. I mean, it's been such a godsend to have something that you can actually just pick diagrams out of and tables out of and make a coherent policy case for improved cycling. I'm not saying any of this is easy, but it has made we've got, there's more tools in the toolbox. Unsurprisingly, we have to pick our battles. I was saying to Andy before the start, I think there's a planning application that affects highways that probably on average comes through every couple of weeks in Bicester of some shape or form. So there is no way on God's earth that we can effectively engage with all of them. There are big ones that we usually engage with. They're surprising, ironically easier, because you can't get bogged down in the detail. It's just a case of reiterating the policies that should be adhered to, especially if they're early stage. The smaller ones are sometimes harder, especially if they're in difficult areas of the town. But yeah, we have to pick our battles. And we have not objected to any development on sort of principle, as much as I would have wanted to object to a Greg's drive-through, for example, on all sorts of other grounds. We do like to stick to our brief and say, well, it can happen if this and this happened, right? Then the cycling and walking could be a net improvement to where it was previously. So that is kind of a sort of, that is a standpoint that we kind of stick by. We never object to anything on principle. We don't want to be NIMBYists in any way. I think that would be almost impossible in Bicester. But there are plenty of people who do for other reasons. So there's plenty of people who don't want any development. They can say their thing. We want to, like a good practicer of judo, we want to use the power of the person to throw themselves on the floor, right? So that's the idea here, is to use the funding, use the opportunity to redesign streets and get the network built piece by piece. These are some of the things, some of the lists of things that we have been involved in. There's quite a few. It keeps growing. These names probably won't mean very much to you, but this is an industrial estate on the southwest of Bicester, which we got. That was one of our first ones that we were engaged in, which had a roundabout and some cycle lanes on it, and it was very classic car-centric when it started, and it was better by the time we finished. We cut our teeth on that one in terms of what was achievable and how to negotiate with the applicants, who we talked to quite a lot, and the officers. And it's better than it would have been, but it's far from perfect. Same goes for this Pioneer roundabout, which is on the A41 heading between Bicester and Aylesbury. and it will connect into Graven Hill on the south side of Bicester. That's also, it was terrible, it got better. It's actually this one. So we had a kind of a battle on their hand. And that one's an interesting one because Graven Hill is a subsidiary company of Cherwell District Council. So they're being asked to approve their own application in a sense. So would they go to appeal if they got turned down? Would they even ever get turned down at planning? Very difficult to know. So those ones, for example, are harder to negotiate because there is no independent applicant that you can talk to. You're talking to the people who are both applying and approving, which is, I think, a little bit incestuous, but is the way it is. We had quite a lot of good input from the Emergency Active Travel Fund. That funded quite a few nice things in Bicester, which were quite uncontroversial, which was great. This Graven Hill access road that goes from the Pioneer Roundabout, that's also being built now, and that's looking really nice with segregated cycleways along the side of the roads, which have priority at junctions, and a Dutch style kind of roundabout on it as well. So that's been quite good. Unsurprisingly, Paul spent a lot of time on that one because it was right on his doorstep. Symmetry Park is outside of Bicester, but could benefit from a connected cycle path, which it currently doesn't have. That's something we're pushing for. And this Banbury Road junction, that's one that's really important to me because that's right on my doorstep on northwest Bicester side. So that's this one up in the top here. So I think the council has been quite brave with that because they did a consultation with 3 options or 4 options. And this one was not the most popular, but it was the best option for cycling and walking, and that's the one that's going to get built. However, and this is where it gets very hard when you've got such a small team, and unless you've got someone like Paul who's like a dog with a bone, from the plans being approved through to actual construction, they're now doing exploratory works to understand what's underneath the ground. Some value engineering was done, which has had quite a detrimental effect on not all aspects, of course, only the cycling and walking aspects of the design. But that all happened under the radar without us knowing. If we hadn't asked what do the current plans look like, we would never have known. So it's incessant trying to keep on top of it all. We do have an LC whip. It's been useful and not useful, I suppose. It exists, so we always reference it in planning applications because not all applicants are aware that such a thing even exists, and they need to be linking into it. So it's been useful in one application because they were building inside, on a kind of industrial brownfield site within Bicester, so they were on a route already. Whereas most of the new applications are, there's no LC whip because it doesn't exist yet. And ironically, the Emergency Active Travel Fund essentially ignored it and just sort of found a bit of street that they could put some cycle lane on and a crossing that they could add. They didn't really reference this at all. But we do still think it's a useful tool, and we do want to we've done a lot of surveying of the routes to see what would be necessary to make them coherent and cyclable from one end to the other, even from little things like dropped curbs and barriers and all these sorts of things. So, and we hand that over. We do a lot of that kind of donkey work sometimes for the councils because they don't always have boots on the ground. So we also have to recognise where they have bottlenecks, and if we can, we try to fill that void. But we will push it and keep it going. We tried to use our sort of online presence to punch above our weight because we're quite a small team, and it is surprising how I was surprised at the beginning when we started Bicester BUG how seriously we got taken when we were only just 2 people, a website and a logo, with essentially no remit to represent anything or anyone. Not like we do, you know, I think we have a genuine mandate now from people to fight the fight. But in the beginning, it was really just two people and an idea. So, but having an online presence really helped. So having our Twitter feed up to date. I mean, Cyclox is great. I took a lot of inspiration from Cyclox for the sort of consistency of message and the branding and the multi thing. And it was quite easy to do, essentially. So this is just, you know, just to show that we keep it up. We keep the sort of steady stream of this thing going. We didn't actually, there's a petition which Robin has been very kindly sharing. We didn't start that. We deliberately kind of didn't start that. It is a friend of ours who did start it, but not at our behest, because one of the many topics which is going on in Bicester is we have a level crossing right in the middle of town, which is on East-West Rail. So it's an active railway line already, because it's the Oxford to London Chiltern line currently. But when it opens up going to Bedford, there'll be so many trains going through it that Network Rail, East-West Rail, will want to close the level crossing, because it will be closed 40 minutes in every hour anyway because of the trains crossing. So they are now trying to come up with a solution for what to do when that closes. And we are pushing for a cycling and walking underpass, because we're afraid that we'll get one of these. This is already in Bicester. We already have that in Bicester, a few hundred meters from where the level crossing is. Everyone else in the town wants a road, a vehicle crossing of some shape or form. But this is like, I don't know, it's about 50 meters, 100 meters from the market square in the center of town. It would be like putting a flyover, I don't know, right in the center of Oxford. Instead of going under Botley, you know, Botley Road, going under, building some massive overpass there to drop in on the other side. That's kind of what a lot of people are asking for, including our MP, who had a closed doors meeting with a number of the local councillors and decided that they had come up with some sort of solution which they're not letting anyone know about. So we don't know what that is. But, you know, this is the bottom left is just to say, you know, we talk to the local reporters quite a lot, so we can get our message out when a topic comes up that we are affected by. We make a few videos every now and again, which are really great for getting the message across. And this is our bike deliveries. When we wrote our own story for that one, which was easy. It's amazing how easy it is to get things into the Bicester Advertiser if you write the copy yourself, and it's a nice story. Doesn't all have to be clickbait, let's put it that way. You know, having nice flyers and having nice posters around the town. It may seem simple, but that's been quite good. And this was all funded by the design, and the printing was funded by, because we have no budget. We have 22 members who pay us £5 a year, so you know that's what we've got to play with. So this was funded by the bookshop who we'd been doing all the book deliveries for. So instead of him paying us, he just said, well, I've got, you know, there's a guy who does my design work and the printers around the corner who do our printing. Just tell them what you want and I'll pay the bill. So that's how we got our sort of, you know, our merchandise stuff that we take, our poster, this one on the right, our sort of pop-up banner on the left, and flyers for a bike buddy scheme that we have, a kind of nascent bike buddy scheme to get people back onto cycling, which has also been quite good and something you can do without having to dedicate a whole day to cycle training or invest in any kit or whatever, because it's just two people just have to look after safeguarding issues, which is quite simple. We copied London Cycle Campaign. We just had a conversation with them and took all their agreements and processes and just took them over one-to-one. So yeah, that was it really from my side. I probably missed out lots of things and lots of great people in Bicester who do fantastic things for us. But that was pretty much the sort of flyby summary I wanted to talk about, if that's all right.
Goodness, Joel, you certainly do punch above your weight. That's fantastic and really encouraging to see how you can make an influence, as you say, by being positive and saying, yes, of course, we support it if X, Y, and Z. One question that came up was, and I think I know what the answer is, but you described the LTNs, and it's true, we've got many in Oxford as well. But they're semi-permeable.
Oh yes, they're very walking and cycling permeable. I should have made that point quite clearly.
No,
no,
well,
they're very cycling and walking permeable.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to ask a question at this point? We'll have another chance in a moment. I thought we'd just ask Robin, if he's kindly there. Hi, Robin. To say a few words about the Oxfordshire Cycle Network, but and then for Mark Harrison from the Cycle Advocacy Network, because I feel this meeting is very much about joining up campaigners and understanding our strengths and weaknesses. I'm sorry that Alison can't be here this evening, but I'm hoping I might just make a few sort of compare and contrasts with Cyclox. But if anybody wants to ask a question at this point, either just unmute and ask or put up their hand. I don't think I'm seeing any at the moment. So, Robin, tell us a little bit about the Oxfordshire Cycle Network.
Yes, and it's interesting to note some parallels in the origin story. And some links. So the story of the Oxfordshire Cycling Network starts actually at the AGM of CTC Wantage, as it was then, in 2014, in the Greyhound pub in Letcombe Regis. Have I got the right Letcombe? Before its revamp, so it's a bit of a not quite so posh a pub as it is today. And at the end of the meeting, somebody called Graham Smith, who many of you will know exceedingly well, stood up and basically said, cycling infrastructure, the infrastructure on the roads is rubbish for cycling. The council's not doing anything about it. And I thought, well, surely I can do something about that. And it won't take very long to sort it out. I was right on the first bit and not on the second. So I started kind of talking to different people and networking around and investigating, and quickly found out that it was the county council that set transport policy. And all around the county, there were different people and different groups. And the biggest, of course, was Cyclox in Oxford, who were campaigning and advocating for cycling in different ways and on somewhat different agendas and approaches, but because it was the county council that they were approaching, the county council was seeing all of these different voices saying all these different things, and it was very confusing. And also a lot of those voices were just purely negative and critical, which doesn't help. And that really ties with George's point about constructive criticism. You've got to go in with a kind of positive voice. If you're not positive, at least at the start, then they're not going to engage with you. So 15 of us originally gathered together at the Jam Factory in Oxford on a kind of January or February evening in the floods of 2015, I think it was. Maybe that was 2014. Agreed that we would form the Oxfordshire Cycling Network. Richard Fairhurst designed us a logo, and we started networking between us, in particular talking about consultations, swapping notes so that we aligned our voices so we would respond with some unity, and with the badge and the logo of the Oxfordshire Cycling Network to give a bit more weight to that, just as George described, and that really did start having more impact. And then a bit later on, we managed, thanks to the Bike Safe group in Ensham, the campaign group for the B4044, Ian Leggett and co, to get a meeting with Ian Hudspeth, the senior, the leader of the council at the time, and I think David Nimmo-Smith, have I got the name right? He was the cabinet member for environment, which included transport, and it was actually because some of the Cycle City Ambition grant had been spent on the plane, mostly to the benefit of buses, leaving it not very good for cycling, as we all know. And then another chunk of it had been spent on improving the footpath by the river, which is a bit better for cycling, but still not great. And we said, no, if you're going to spend cycling money, it's got to be good for cycling. So we got the meeting. The leader of the Oxford LEP, Local Economic Partnership, was there, and he said, we've just set up a transport group. Would one of you like to come on that? And as I was the one wearing the suit, that was me. So we've gradually expanded our influence through that. The next big, sorry, I'm going on a bit here, but the next big evolution, and what I wanted to ask George about, was that we and others realised that campaigning for cycling was a bit of a special interest cause, very important one, but not important to everyone. And we teamed up with, as well as Cyclox, with the Pedestrians Association, Oxfordshire Livable Streets, and some of the low carbon groups and Friends of the Earth to form COSAT, the Coalition for Healthy Streets and Active Travel, as a much more broader and more broadly appealing group, so that we can have, so we go out and not just say, please build something for cyclists and for cycling, but would you like a better street? Would you like a healthier street? Would you like a nicer environment to live in? Which I think was an important step. And so I'll stop talking about the story there, but I'll ask George whether that's a discussion you've had in Bicester.
Well, yes. I mean, I think if I did it over again, I probably wouldn't call us Bicester BUG, because I think it would be, but we would probably be better rebranding as, you know, I don't know, Bicester something else. But interestingly, yeah, we do. I think leveraging that has been very useful. For example, the level crossing I mentioned. One of the primary things we've been doing there is that there's an old people's home that's will be cut off from the town centre if that gets closed, and there's a steady stream of people on mobility scooters and all sorts of, and with limited mobility, who use that level crossing now to walk or roll into town. So we went flyering there, and we caught them as they crossed, and we've been getting them to lobby and so on and so forth. That's just a general access issue, and that's been quite useful. We are, at some point, I know Cyclops is a charity, we are thinking about becoming a community infrastructure company, essentially so that we could, if we wanted to take legal action, you know, again, for, you know, under the Equalities Act for someone to challenge planning applications that are discriminatory against people within any sort of limited mobility, and that, you know, we can't do that in our current form, because we'd all be personally liable. So
right.
we'd rather be something where we're not all on the hook.
Useful having a lawyer on board.
It is considerably useful. Yes, those two things together, I think, are useful, and just a rebrand with, and maybe when we become a community infrastructure interest company, sorry, CIC, we might rebrand as something other than Bicester BUG to be a bit more inclusive, even if cycling is still a major part of what we do.
Thank you, Robin. And it is a useful, I mean, OCN I always think as the glue that holds us all together. And you know, it's a difficult job like herding cats or whatever, but I thank you for your continuing efforts to get us all singing from the same hymn sheet, or whatever other metaphor I might think of. The other glue, if Mark doesn't mind me calling it that, is the Cycle Advocacy Network, which Cycling UK, after a lot of soul searching, set up 2 or 3 years ago. Again, you know, they're trying to help different campaign groups in different stages of evolution to be more effective, both by sharing resources and also helping people to communicate between each other. It's a national thing, obviously, being Cycling UK, but Mark is our, I call him the regional rep. He has an odd territory of West Thames and South Midlands. And Mark, are you there somewhere to, and I've made you share screen if you'd like to show your slides, or I can show them if that's easier. But tell us a bit about, oh, hi.
I think if you wouldn't mind sharing the slides I sent you, because that would be good.
Sure.
I don't know. I don't use Zoom that often. I'm very often on Teams calls, but not Zoom. So, so that was my watch going. A Siri on my watch saying he's trying to help me, but he doesn't help anybody ever.
I'll be just one moment. I got myself into a tangle. There we are. Share screen. Share. And that should be a white screen, and then okay.
There it is. So I don't want to monopolize any conversation here. I think there's a lot of discussion to go on. Yes, I mean, when we came up with CAN, there were not enough people to be coordinators to have one per county. So we had, I eventually came up with the name of the West Thames and South Midlands, because it kind of goes, the patch goes into Leicestershire and Warwickshire and Berkshire and various other counties. So that's why that name came about. I know it's a bit of a mouthful. My personal view, I'm not going to speak much about me personally, but my credentials were really as I set up a group called Farcicles, which is quite a strong cycling group in Farringdon, which is kind of the opposite side of Oxford from Bicester, although I used to travel through Bicester daily to go to Milton Keynes for many years. So I was the chair for 10 years, and I've recently retired, and there's some younger people coming through to do that. We have a sportive every year, which is pretty successful and raises quite a lot of money for our activities in Farringdon. And we also have a shop in Farringdon, which is, we've started out as a sort of squatting in an old shop, and we now have a proper shop that we actually pay rent for, and it's quite impressive if you ever drive through Farringdon to have a look at the Farcicles shop. But that's enough about Farcicles. I would like to emphasize that we campaign for active travel rather than cycling, because the one area that we haven't really touched on so far this evening is, very much anyway, is wheelchairs and parents and carers with buggies. And if you have a town like ours, and Bicester too, I'm familiar enough with it, but and also very much Oxford, it is often very difficult for a parent to wheel a buggy with a toddler and a child going to care into the nurseries and things like that, when you to get around with cars parking on pavements and things like that. So it's very important that we get into that side of things. My personal, I previously have been in the public sector as a program and project director, so I'm kind of quite familiar with, that's the skill that I offer to personally to help people, but I try and pull people together who are keen to help. So it's a volunteer organization mostly, I think there's a couple of people, officers within Cycling UK who are actually paid, but the rest of us are volunteers, and it's quite interesting. People, when you have volunteers doing things, a lot of people have their own ideas and things like that, and so we're not trying to interfere with their ideas, but we would like to help where we can, because we've built a cycling school, and we're also doing an LC whip, and we've got quite a lot of infrastructure, and Section 106 money is quite important to us, because we get quite a reasonable amount of it. Like Bicester, there's a lot of development going on, and our mayor, our town clerk was very cunning in that she is now got a master's degree in local government. She found that if your council is elected, which means that you have to have 2/3 of the people on the council have been elected, you can then have a lot more say in how things like Section 106 is used. So otherwise it would have to go via the county council and things like that, and it gets few blockages occur. So continuing into the role in Cycling UK, what I personally try and do, and what we are supposed to do, is share information between individual campaigns, because there are people I know there are people in Leicestershire are very active. There are people in Oxford, obviously. There are people in Bicester, there are people in Banbury, people in Witney, all trying to do stuff. So, and very often they don't have that linkage between their efforts. So that's kind of one of the things we try to we try to facilitate. So, if somebody wants to know who else is doing what they're trying to do, I probably know if there is someone out there doing what they. So a half-hour phone call, I may be able to help you, I may not. But I do know quite a lot of the other people in Oxfordshire, particularly, who are more technically competent than I am to look at some of the LTN 120 type stuff, and so we're quite capable of helping develop LC whips and things like that. And I have actually had a look through and made comments, for example, one they're doing in Swindon on behalf of Oxfordshire County Council, who's been asked to help Swindon. So there is quite a lot of cross-pollination going on. But you probably hear from what I'm saying that I'm probably more of a communicator or a politician than a technical expert. And Andy's already spoken about Graham Smith, but there's Danny Yee, and some of the Oxfordshire County Council officers are very, very qualified in the technical aspects of doing this stuff, but they are overworked. So my view is that we have to help them as much as we can. So if we can prepare something like an LC whip to take to them, then they have to do it themselves. But we can do probably 80% of the work before it actually gets to them to have to do something. So CAN is about building teams, quite informal ones very often. And I stuck a few cliches in there. No person is an island, and someone else has always been there before, because they have. I mean, nobody else has done that. So yes, Robin mentioned stirring in the media. I think Andy's probably done a bit of that himself. And so yeah, I do sort of lock horns with people as CAN Thames West. And if I get really cross, because I try to preserve my preserve Cycling UK in what I say in CAN. If I get really cross, I hop onto my own Twitter account and vent some spleen, which helps me anyway. I don't know if it helps anyone else. What we are, we're very pro low traffic neighbourhoods, and like Bicester and like much of Oxford actually, Farringdon, I personally live in an LTN. It's blocked at one end. If it wasn't, all the traffic coming from Swindon and Highworth to the rest of Oxfordshire would go past my front door, and it doesn't. I'm very, I've campaigned a lot on behalf of CAN and on 15-minute neighbourhoods, or 20 minutes, some people call them. I do kind of, I can't emphasize enough how much wheeling and buggying, or whatever you want to call it. There's no easy name for that, perambulating. That has other meanings. But they stakeholders for doing this kind of thing are essential. And our friends in Bicester have found this by people living in sheltered housing who have to, get into the square. And the people, there's a person in Farringdon, for example, who is a wheelchair user, and she calls it walking because she can't walk, but she can take her dog for a wheel around. And she's passionate about trying to get better facilities for that. So, those are people that we need to involve in what we're doing as well. This is probably a bit personal, but I'm extremely pro 20 miles an hour in all urban areas, and a default of 40 miles an hour on rural roads. I mean, there have to be exceptions for main arteries, but I happen to live on the one part of the A420 between Oxford and Swindon that is single carriageway, where some idiot has allowed it to be 60 miles an hour just for that short section. The rest of the thing is 50. Someone's decided that it's 60. So a few people have been killed on our bypass, quite a lot actually. So, and I don't like to use that as ammunition particularly, but it's quite daunting if anybody wants to use that or cross it. Pollution free, clean air, low noise, that, I mean, that's goes without saying. And insofar as I understand what Vision Zero means, I'm a strong supporter of that. So I'm not going to say any more, because hopefully that gives you a flavor, and you'll get bored if I carry on any longer. So, but please contact me if you have anything, and nothing is too small. I'll speak to you, I'll answer emails. Just feel that I'm a friend that's out there, and there's a whole CAN network behind me that can contribute to that.
I would echo that. I must say the team in Cycling UK, Stephen Dominey and so on, are very accessible. And I think when I write up this evening's meeting for our newsletter, I will put your email address in, Mark, and then apologise later anyway. But thank you for that. And John Tranter is with us, and I know you may feel I'm sort of pressing people a bit hard, but he's in an even earlier stage of evolution, if I understand it correctly. And I just wondered, John, if you'd like to give us a little bit of the flavour of what it's like in Wantage as you set up a new campaign organisation. Do unmute yourself and tell us your experience.
Yes, thanks, Andy. Love to do that. Is it possible to take the slides down as out of interest?
Yeah, of course. Silly. Sorry.
I'll sort of kick off.
Here we are.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time. And this is, for me, very, very exciting and extremely useful. Just to set some context, for me personally, I've just retired. I've taken early retirement, which is a great privileged position to be in. And I must admit, I'm overwhelmed with admiration for George and what they've achieved in Bicester with people who aren't retired, because one of our key challenges actually was finding time and resource and bandwidth to do stuff. And one of our opportunities at the moment is a couple of people like me who are early retired and actually do therefore have a bit more time to devote to this. So that's interesting. But I retired from the role of one of the bursars of one of the colleges in Oxford, St. Cross College, which means I was quite well connected in Oxford previously. And although life is now sort of folded back to Wantage and Grove, those connections are still quite helpful, I think, in some of the things that we do. Wantage and Grove, for those who aren't familiar with it, I mean, we talk about Wantage and Grove as if there's a sort of a little N in between the two. Part of the reason for that actually is because they are both expanded very substantially. I very much sort of respond and recognise what George was saying about Bicester in terms of housing development. Both Wantage is an ancient market town, birthplace of King Alfred, Domesday Book, etc., etc. Grove was a tiny village, strangely on the edge of Wantage. It was never very far away. It's like a mile from Wantage. So there was this little market town, and there was this little village that was just a mile up the road. Brief history is that in the Second World War, an enormous US Air Force airfield was built on the edge of Grove, I mean, right on the edge of the village, which actually was one of the busiest airfields in use in the entire war, although it was a logistics hub, so it wasn't a sort of frontline base, but it was incredibly busy. And so Grove got quite influenced that, not least the fact that the main road through it is still called Main Street, which you may recognise having a certain American tang to it. There was then, the usual housing development post-war, so 60s, 70s, quite a lot of good development, I would say. And again, with modern eyes, good developments in terms of things that look like LTNs, things that have permeability, very good cut-throughs, paths, etc. But both Wantage and Grove expanded, and they got closer together. And now, depending on who you talk to locally, some people are very excited about keeping them separate at all costs, and some people aren't. Certainly from our point of view, from a sort of lobbying and advocacy point of view, it's proven quite useful to talk about Wantage and Grove, because that conglomerate, that urban conglomerate, population taken together, sort of pushes it up the league table quite usefully, quite frankly. So at the moment, based on the 2021 census data, which is just coming through on population, we position ourselves as 7th in the Oxford conurbation population league table. Just to set that scene. Bicester's 5th, sorry, 4th. No, 5th, sorry, but Bicester's 5th. So Bicester's winning, but if we take Wantage and Grove together, we're not far behind. And Grove in particular has got an enormous new development going on at the moment, in fact, ironically, the old airfield. But Wantage also has a couple of major estates being built also. So they're both Wantage and Grove are expanding in population extremely rapidly. So a lot of those same issues are familiar. People have been playing around with trying to make things a bit better on active travel for a while. There's a very good, one I would source, I guess, called sort of eco-green group in Wantage called Sustainable Wantage, who are very good and very, very good partners of ours. And individuals have tried to do various bits and pieces over time. But in a way, things came together with my retirement and with a couple of things going on last summer. We decided it might be the right time to create a group and create a sort of a brand. And again, I'm picking it very much on what George was saying earlier. It does seem important in the modern world to be a thing rather than some individual who's a bit eccentric. So, some weird bloke called John Tranter writing to the local paper or putting a post on Facebook is one thing, but a local group that's got a really nice logo, well, that's a different thing altogether, because that's got credibility and that's important somehow. So I think the punching above the weight thing is really, we discovered that's very important. And actually we quickly discovered we needed a logo. And in fact, we've got one almost ready to go, actually. So that's quite helpful. And these things are at one level ridiculous, but another level important, because I think they bestow a certain credibility on things. And I think also the other stakeholders, particularly the councils, the councillors, the officers and so on, are probably looking for help. So if a group turns up and it's sensible and it's positive and it's supportive, then why not take their advice? Because it's a lot easier than not. So that's kind of, I think I'm recognizing a lot of things that happen in Bicester there as well. So we have, we're not an entity, we're not a charity, we're a nothing other than a group idea. I'm the chair. We have another chap who's the secretary, and we have, I guess there's 4 of us that we would call the core team, and then we have supporters who are typically, for example, members of Sustainable Wantage, the local pedestrian group, the local mobility group. So in terms of disability, mobility, and so on, that's important for us as well. And indeed, some of the local councillors. Interestingly, one of the problems of being Wantage and Grove, it's all very well, but actually when you get into local politics, you've then got Oxfordshire County Council, you've got Vale of Whitehorse District Council, then you've got Wantage Town Council and Grove Parish Council, who don't always see eye to eye. So that makes it a bit more difficult for us, unfortunately, especially when, for example, one of our local projects is signposting existing good routes between Wantage and Grove. And you can imagine what's happened is that Wantage Town Council is very keen to fund this, but not particularly keen to fund the signpost at the Grove end. So we're working on that. So I think, the area is typical of many. It's got bits, as I said, the development in the 70s in particular seemed to be quite good. And you kind of wonder where that got lost. If it's just purely greed on the part of developers, I'm not sure. But an awful lot of good practice seems to have been forgotten about over time. So now with the big new developments, we're very much engaged with that as one of our key strategic areas. And again, as people have said, within the development, actually they're tending to do some reasonably nice things and some reasonably sensible things. The difficulty is getting from the development to somewhere else. So one of the things that we're finding quite useful and has got some traction, it might be useful to mention this, is that we're looking at the idea of journeys quite strongly. So we're very big on saying, what are we trying to achieve? What's our remit? Well, our remit is to say there are lots of journeys that people in this area need to make. Many of them are quite short journeys within the area. And we would like to make as many of those journeys as possible attractive, safe, and desirable to do without a car. It's as simple as that. But it's about journeys. I think that's really important. So again, as people have said, rather than building some tokenistic bit of infrastructure that doesn't connect to anything, the point is, especially if you just moved into one of these new estates, the estate's nice, it's really great, it's got cycle lanes and everything. The question is, how do you get from that estate to the Wantage marketplace where the shops are? How do you get to the local health centre or Mabley Way? How do you get to the school, King Alfred's Academy? How do you get to the junior school? How do you get to the church? How do you get to the cafe, which is the place that people actually want to go on these journeys? So we're finding that that's quite a useful sort of tagline that's got some traction. So, for example, one of the things that we hope is a bit of a quick win that's in progress right now is to look at the existing network of paths, cut-throughs, tracks. I have to say, sadly, this is a lot easier for walking than it is for cycling, but many of those just need a signpost. And I've lost track of the number of conversations I've had in the last few months with local residents who will say something like, I've lived here for 20 years. I had no idea that path was there. I've lived in Wantage for 25 years. I had no idea I could walk to the health centre in 20 minutes without touching a main road. I didn't know that was possible. So just sticking a signpost up, which is incredibly cheap, is a really powerful thing. So again, one thing I will pick up on is that we are Wantage and Grove Active Travel. We chose that name. I happen to be the chair of Cycling UK Wantage, the local leisure cycling club. I choose not to push that because I don't want it to be actually a cycling related thing. I think we are quite keen on being active travel. I know that in itself is a sort of technical term and doesn't necessarily mean much to ordinary people, but I think it makes more sense as a sort of umbrella term. So we've gone with that. And we're very keen on trying to be even-handed. But I have to say, when you look at the infrastructure, it is significantly more difficult to make cycling work than it is to make walking work, actually. As I said, we're going to make a lot of progress in the next few months, we hope. We're just putting signposts up to help walking, but many of those routes are not suitable for cycling, and that becomes more difficult. And the challenges are the usual challenges everyone's spoken about. I mean, for example, right now, if anyone knows the area, alongside the A338, which is the main A road north-south through Wantage and Grove, between Wantage and Grove, alongside this A road, there has been, mid-1980s, there was a separated shared use active travel path built. It's really quite surprising and quite unusual, actually. And many people have come down from Oxford and said, that's one of the best bits of shared use infrastructure in the county, actually, outside of the city. Well, you can imagine what's happening is it's being damaged. So the first bit of damage was about 2 or 3 years ago when planning was granted for a care home along there. And of course, the care home entrance was going to cut straight through its path. So that was one of our early campaigns before we existed as an entity, was battling to say, you know, surely the path ought to have priority, and all the usual stuff about cyclist dismount signs that they went up overnight and then they were taken down again. And I think, again, echo what George said, we didn't get full success on that, but we got some success, and it's a lot better than it would have been otherwise. There's now a bigger problem because there's a major sort of ring road effectively coming into a roundabout on this path as a result of one of the big developments. And of course, at the moment, the building work is going on to reconfigure this roundabout. So guess what, of course, the contractors turned up. The first thing they've done is put a big sign on this precious separated use path saying, yeah, it's closed. Good luck. And actually, it's a path which is the most important route for all of the school children who live in Grove to get to the only secondary school in the area, which is in Wantage, and is absolutely crucial. And that wasn't given a moment's thought by anybody at any level. So we're battling to try and recover that situation at the moment. So yeah, it's kind of the usual stuff. And so I guess my initial opening sort of campaign is around networking. That's the thing I think is important. So, and also being an Oxford College bursar, that's what they do. So it's something I think I'm probably quite good at. So, you know, there's a lot of meetings and coffees with the county councillors, the Vale councillors, the Wantage town councillors, the Grove parish councillors, the relevant county traffic and highways officers, and any other stakeholders we can find, really, to try and sort of build a bit of a critical mass.
Thank you, John. Well, it's very encouraging to hear so many aspects echoed from what George was saying, and good luck with the future growth of Wantage and Grove. Christian Monden has a couple of questions. I don't know if you'd like to just ask them, because you've got one each for John and George. Christian, do you want to come online, or shall I ask them? I'll beat him to it. So, John, we all agree with the signposts are incredibly powerful, and Christian just asks, did they have timings on them, which from time to time you see around the place? Is that something?
Yeah, it's something that we picked up on quite strongly, actually. And I take no credit for this, actually. My colleague Guy Wilkins, as some of you will know, he's actually a long-standing member of HARBUG, so the Harwell site bicycle user group, but lives in Wantage. This is mostly his work, but it became clear to us that that was the best way to do this was very much with timings.
Yeah.
So for example, and so the signs will have, I mean, they're not actually physically there yet, but they're in design and they're in plan. The signs will have, you know, something like Grove to, there will be a sign in Grove, hopefully on this path when it's fixed, pointing towards Wantage, and there'll be a picture of a bicycle, and it will say 10 minutes, Wantage Town Centre. And then there'll be a picture of a person, and it will say walking 20 minutes or 25 minutes, that sort of. And we debated, actually, we've got a wheelchair sign as well. We debated, do we put a different timing in for that? The general view, actually, of our mobility friends was no. So the sense is, interestingly, that, you know, let's treat walking and, you know, mobility access as kind of about the same. So it just keeps the sign a bit simpler.
And the other, thank you. And the other question Christian had was for George about the Dutch style roundabout. And I think we were all excited to see the plan that you showed up. And
I hope I haven't
don't know if you can
oversold
say
it.
any more about it. And
No, I can show you the drawing because it's wait a second.
great.
And I'll get told, oh, that's not really very Dutch, but it's about as Dutch. It's about as Dutch as it gets in Bicester. It was this. So it does have a continuous cycle path that goes around all 4 arms of the roundabout with priority at each arm, and links to this cycle path that goes on here. And this will continue. I think that then continues into Graven Hill. So that was the roundabout I was referring to. Sorry, I didn't even share it, did I? Did I share it?
Ah, you have now.
I have now, this one. So there's a continuous cycle path around all 4 arms of the roundabout.
Okay,
with priority.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a brand new road. It's not an adjustment of a new road. It's an old access road. Like John, you know, this is access to the old Graven Hill site, which was the MOD depot. So MOD land is ripe. So yeah,
Well,
it's not like a purist Dutch roundabout, but you know, we bang on about priority for junctions and arms of roundabouts all the time. So you know, we were cock a hoop to get this.
I would say, George, that's quite remarkable, because that seems to me, I'm not sure I've ever seen an example anywhere in Oxfordshire of anything like that, actually.
It is.
But there isn't yet.
We don't seem to get consistent replies on it, because you know we get responses. Well, we can't do that because we've not done it before. And that gets thrown back at us quite a lot. And other times, they just go and do something, or you know, left field, probably when nobody's watching, because there's no. This is not an existing road, I think, and they don't have to deal with any. Well, it wasn't like that. It was like it was better. It was different before.
It turns out to be, even traffic engineers are human, and some of them have different ideas than others.
Yeah.
And and one day there will be the first Dutch roundabout in Oxfordshire. And Brian has his hand up. Sorry, Andy.
Yeah. Far away.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me okay, but I just wanted to congratulate George for campaigning on the underpasses. I think that's really is the way to go, just especially for vulnerable cyclists, old cyclists, hand cyclists, and people who don't want to travel over high bridges. So I think the underpasses are really great. I do apologize for this, but I just want to pour cold water a little bit on the Dutch style roundabouts. We have one in our city, and I have the problem with it's nice for the cyclists to have priority. The problem is that the cars don't always give you that priority. We've had 2 hospitalizations so far on the Fendon Road roundabout. I agree with the chap who writes about these things in Holland. He's an English guy. He sells Dutch bike bits. If people know him, he has a blog where he writes about this. And the problem is that a lot of cars, the BMWs, the Audis, the Range Rovers, do not understand that the middle pedal is a brake and that they should use it. And so I just wonder if I could give some examples from Oxford, which are really contrasting. South of Oxford, there's a great roundabout with a bear pit, and that is safe to use. And I've tried it, and it really is very nice. But north of Oxford,
the Kennington roundabout?
I believe it is. Yeah.
The underpasses all around.
Bear pit, you mean underpasses?
Exactly, exactly. And that's I think what you need to go for safety, especially with school kids and old people. But north of Oxford, there's this crazy plan at Kidlington for an at-grade roundabout. Now that's what I would call a sort of an out-of-town roundabout, where cars are coming incredibly fast. There's no way that they're going to give way to cyclists there. I mean, the problem is it's the 5% of drivers. 95% of drivers are really good, but it's the 5% that are causing the problem. So I'd really urge you, George, in Bicester, if you can, just get everything grade separated completely, especially at junctions.
Isn't this about horses for courses or whatever you'd say, that, you know, some, and it's a shame that Christian, who says this sounds Dutch enough, isn't able to speak, but for the right roundabouts, a Dutch style is perfect. But I agree, for a motorway roundabout, it's not going to work, and it's making the judgment. But George, I don't know whether you'd like to have a last word.
No, I mean,
we must finish now.
I do agree, and this is not an arterial road it's going to be on. It's an access road to.
But Brian is giving experience from Cambridge, and I don't think the Fendon Road is a arterial road. Well, it might be a big road, but it's in an urban area.
Yeah. And it's quite. I mean, and we do have some bigger roundabouts where we would never even think about it, because I'd much prefer to have the bear pit version, which are on the A41, for example.
Can I go back to the main theme and ask kind of go back to a broader question, which is that so we've got several groups represented which are in different stages of development, and also I've just been approached by a new group in Tame. Well, it's an existing group that now wants to join COSAT, and then there's because they're due to get an LC-WIP this year, and then the sustainability group in Wallingford wants to learn more about active travel. I've sent out an email because I can't do that one, so it'd be good if somebody else can go and talk to people in Wallingford in a couple of weeks' time. But we've got these different groups, and I've been talking to John a bit about the idea of compiling essentially a sort of manual. I don't mean a too heavy a manual, but some kind of guide for forming active travel campaign groups about what to do and how to do it, which I think Simon Monk has done a bit of in London. I mean, he's employed to do this as a job, but I've looked. Cycling UK doesn't really have a guide to how to set up a cycling campaign group, and yet there are a lot of resources around that it would be useful to signpost people to, kind of how to campaign about infrastructure such as LTM 120, how to run your email, how to do Twitter, lots of different aspects, how to engage with the council, how to do planning responses, because there are right and wrong ways to do all of those. And so my first question is that a useful thing to have, or is that kind of surplus to requirements?
I might leave it as a rhetorical question, because clearly it's useful, but creating it is the challenge, and keeping it up to date. So I'm going to hand over to George for a last word, if on that or any other aspect, and then we'll close the meeting, because I think well, it's really about we wanted to hear about Bicester in particular this evening, but I'm sure this conversation will continue, because I think you're absolutely right, Robin, that we need shared resources, and of course Mark is saying that as well. George.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Robin, and I don't know if it we talked about in Bicester, one of the ways how to get we were doing a lot of things on planning. We do a lot of things on planning. We didn't do a lot with the soft side, getting people onto bikes. So we started a bike buddy scheme, because we can't do cycle training. And when we were starting Bicester BUG, it was nice just to talk to people who had been through it, who could give us a few pointers, and then we formed our own way out of that system into what we wanted for Bicester. So I think I had 2 or 3 people who kind of mentored me through that first bit, of which you were one, Robin. And I quite like that idea rather than a manual, to be honest. In the same way, I prefer bike buddy scheme to get people back onto bikes than a lesson plan and a checklist of things that you have to do to get cycle training done. Because a lot of people we engaged with, it was just confidence building that they needed and a few pointers rather than cycle training per se. So that's my last moment, is trying to draw the two things together.
Very good.
So yeah, that was it.
Well, and I will just say one thing. One of the founders of Cyclox 20 years ago described campaigning as a doocracy. If you've got some enthusiast who wants to do something,
Yes.
let them do it. You know, there's no point in stifling innovation. And if there's an enthusiast for Twitter, great. But if there isn't, well, so, okay. Well, thank you to all the contributors.
Yes.
It's been a great evening. I've really enjoyed it. And I will check back with all of the speakers when we've got the recording, so that, see if you're happy for it to be on our YouTube channel. But that's for later. Thank you to all. Bye.
Great. Excellent.
Well done.
Thanks.
Thank you, George. Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Well done. And that was brilliantly prepared, I must say, George. Excellent. So
It's a pleasure. No, thanks everyone
Thank you.
for the nice support and the questions.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed that.
great. Thanks,
That's
Robin.
great. I
Cheers, then.
wanted to ask you though, George, what do you use for your email? Sending out your emails, or is that not you?
I use George at Bicester BUG. The one I don't use anymore.
Oh no, I mean
What? Oh, for
your
to
email
manage
managing your email list.
Oh, I use MailChimp.
Oh, okay, MailChimp. Okay.
Yeah, I still use MailChimp. It's not a big enough list that we have to pay for it. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
yeah, I didn't even go
Just
through the
press the
tools
button.
we use. Right.
You're going to
See you,
switch this
Andy.
off, okay?
Yeah.
All
Bye.
right. All the best. Bye.